Hello, Smart Money Tree podcast listeners. Welcome to this week's show. My name is Kirk Chisholm. I'll be your host. So today I'm here with Daniel Crosby. How you doing today, Daniel?
Kirk, I'm good, man. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays. Well, glad to have you on your show. On the show, I know got a new book out, which is great. But for those listeners who are not familiar with you, and can't imagine there are many, but tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I am a behavioral finance expert. I'm the chief behavioral officer at Orion Advisor Solutions. And I think the cool thing about me is that I am a clinical psychologist by education. So I went to school to be a shrink, sold my soul to Wall Street shortly after graduating with my PhD, and have spent my career just thinking, studying, writing about the psychology of money.
Nice, nice. Well, congratulations for selling your soul. Everyone who
It's
works in
worked
Wall
out. It's
Street.
worked out.
It's great. Probably better than the alternative, right? Getting into medicine and practice. But you can help a lot more people, which is great. So tell us about that. What caused that pivot? Why go into Wall Street with that kind of background?
Burnout, burnout is the simple answer. I was 23 years old when I began my career as a clinician, which I think you and I can both agree is an age where you have it all figured out and you should definitely be telling people how to live their lives. And so, quickly just started taking work home with me, 40 to 50 hours a week of talking to people who are going through some of the worst things that life has to offer is a heavy way to make a living. I was a young man with poor boundaries and I was just taking it home and it was sort of eating me up. And so I went to my dad, who is a financial advisor, and I said, "Hey, I love human behavior. I love studying human behavior, but I don't want to do it in a clinical context. How would you direct me? What ideas do you have?" And he said something to me that shocked me at the time. He said, "Daniel, there's a ton of psychology in my work." And I had always envisioned my dad as being, one part salesman and one part stock picker. And so had never really conceptualized of his work as being tied to behavioral finance. He certainly didn't know the term behavioral finance, 17 years ago. But that simple comment by him set me down a path to look into it and to eventually build a career around it.
Yeah, it's Wall Street is a petri dish of of psychology. I think it's nothing but psychology, frankly. And you just, you
Mm.
move some numbers around, but basically, I I have to agree. I always had a fascination with human behavior. And when I was younger, as you said, we have it all figured out. I think when I was 20, I had it figured out. When I was 30, I had it figured out. When I was 40, I had it figured out. And realized afterwards, like I knew nothing at those times, but I did love the human psychology part, and Wall Street has that in spades. So, what are some things that I mean, you've been in the field for a little while. So, what are some things you've kind of taken away from your Wall Street experience? Like, what are some big highlights that you've learned that you didn't know before you got in?
Oh, well, I mean, I think what you said about the Petri dish is right on. It really is psychology all the way down. Psychology is the bottommost turtle of all things finance. I think the thing that's fun for me, I've written three solo books on behavioral finance, and each one of them has tackled psychology from a different angle. And in the laws of wealth, it was sort of like, as a retail investor, how can you manage your own behavior so that you get out of your own way and that you don't stumble into some of these common behavioral traps? In the behavioral investor, I talked about ways in which asset managers and financial professionals can incorporate a deep understanding of human psychology into things like portfolio construction and stock picking. And then in my most recent book, The Soul of Wealth, I talk about the softer side of Sears. It's things like gratitude and happiness and forgiveness and compassion and generosity. And psychology has a lot to say about how we take the wealth we've been given and create a meaningful life around it. So it's fun for me, whether you're talking about managing your own money, managing someone else's money, taking the money you've made and deploying those resources in a way that makes you happy and makes your life joyful and fulfilled. Psychology has something to say about all of that, and it is sort of the primary consideration across all those seemingly divergent contexts.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think about, my experience when I started in 99. Um, it was still back in the heyday. It wasn't quite the Gordon Gekko world of Wall Street, but it was some derivative thereof, and people were just working themselves to the bone. I had a kid I went to school with a few years behind me, ended up having a heart attack. He worked for a hedge fund, very successful, made lots of money, and had a heart attack at a very young age, like 30 or
Mm,
some crazy number. Um, and I just remember like thinking about this. Like one of the reasons I didn't go work in New York, because I had a lot of friends who did. One reason I didn't go is because I didn't want it that much. I
mhm,
loved this field. I still do. I absolutely love it. It's nothing else I want to do. But going to New York is a whole nother level of crazy. And, everyone there is just, you're competing against the best in the world and the smartest in the world.
mhm,
And I always saw this. There's people who are there forever, and they just make it work, and they just stay in that hyper competitive job. And there's some people they work there for like 10 years, and then they go get a real job.
mhm.
And so I always wondered like what would cause that sort of transition in somebody, and how can people maybe tease out a meaningful existence rather than just I'm going to be the best, I'm going to have the most money, I'm going to have the most toys. Um, how can people think about it differently so maybe they can actually enjoy the work that they're doing?
So the first chapter in the Soul of Wealth, just to set it up a little bit, it's 50 chapters. It's 50 short essays on these different facets of money and meaning. And the first chapter is called Wealth Isn't About the Numbers. And in that chapter, I speak to the very thing you're talking about, and I speak to this five-factor model that's been developed by Martin Seligman, Dr. Martin Seligman, out of the University of Pennsylvania. He's the sort of the world's most preeminent positive psychologist. And whereas many psychologists like myself back in my heyday there, we would study things like what makes people sad or broken or anxious or depressed. He studies what makes people great and what makes people flourish. And he sets forth these five facets of a meaningful life. And it's called the PERMA model. So the P in PERMA is for positive experiences. This is fun and leisure, you know, driving a fast car, eating an ice cream cone, going to a ball game, going on a walk on a beach, whatever, fun and leisure, positive experiences. The E in PERMA is for engagement, which is doing deep, meaningful work. The R is for relationships, giving and receiving love. The M is for meaning, working for something bigger than ourselves, God, spirituality, teamwork, philanthropy. And the A is for advancement or achievement, which speaks to this very human need to grow and progress and be better today than we were yesterday. Now, in the scenario that you're talking about, and this is the most common thing we see, is that people optimize for one dimension of PERMA and not all five. And they often do it to the exclusion of the other four. And the thing that we tend to optimize for is the P, the positive experiences. This is the stuff that you can post about on Instagram. This is the stuff that's visible. This is the stuff that you can brag about. And most people think about happiness in a rather unidimensional way. They think about it in terms of prosperity, success, material abundance. And it's a lot more than that. It's those other four things too. It's self-sacrifice, growth, teamwork, spirituality, hard work, deep relationships. But none of these things are as easily quantified or as easily shared or as easily measured as money in the bank and a sexy vacation. And so this is the tale as old as time, people optimizing for that P and leaving the other four facets on the wayside.
So yeah, I appreciate that. I think that's a good perspective. But let me ask you this. I mean, when I'm 23 years old and I just graduated college and I'm looking for a job, um, I I would imagine that while they're all important, the P is the most important one because you're not going to have the rest. You're not going to have all the fun stuff in life if you can't make money. Um, and so I think people kind of get caught in that, as I did for sure. Working 7 days a week, 12-hour days, just trying to grind it out to get that success that leads to everything else. How can people incorporate that earlier in the process as opposed to waiting until they have the P first?
Yeah, that's the right way to do it. I think a lot of times we think about these things in overly binary terms, like, well, I'm just going to grind for 10 years. I'm going to grind for 10 years and then I'll get married and then I'll worry about relationships. And it is certainly true. Part of what you said is certainly true that at different times and seasons in our lives, we have different priorities. And in your early 20s, if there's ever a time to maximize for fun and enjoyment, your early 20s is certainly it. However, that doesn't mean you're devoid of the need for relationships or meaning or growth. And I think a lot of people act as though they are devoid of that, and they try and optimize for that one single dimension, and then they have a heart attack when they're 30. Right? So I think that we need to realize that life is a little more complicated than that. We need to prioritize all five dimensions when we're looking for work and crafting and designing a life. And I think we also need to realize that there are no finish lines in life. There's another chapter in the book about that there will never be a good time. If you get a job when you're 23 years old that pays you seven figures or whatever your notion of an extravagant income is, if you get this job and you're crushing it for 10 years, it is so hard to flip a switch when you're 32 or 33 years old and go, okay, well, I won't make big money anymore. Now I'm in my kindergarten teacher era and I'm just going to go seek out the best things in life. I mean, it's possible, but it is very hard. Inertia is a thing, momentum is a thing. And so I think we have to prioritize those other four dimensions from an early age because there's no age at which they're unimportant.
Yeah, no, I agree. A few years ago, I heard about this Japanese concept called, I'm probably going to butcher the how to say it, but the ikigai, I think it is,
Hmm.
um, where you is a combination of what you love, what you're good at, what you're paid for, and what the world needs.
Hmm.
I've always been fascinated with that concept, and I think probably not a lot of people put effort into that because it's just not a cultural concept we have. But what do you think about that in terms of how people should pursue their life goals?
I love that concept, and I'm someone who spends a lot of time more perhaps than is healthy, thinking about purpose and meaning in life. And I think that ikigai concept that you just introduced is really powerful. It is a little bit of a westernization of the original Japanese concept, but it is like a powerful one. There's another I have written about another approach that the research backs up that I call my three B's, and it's believing, belonging, and becoming. If you look at people who have really good lives, they tend to have three things in common. One is they have a belief system. They have rules for living. They have a personal credo. They have rules and morals and standards that help them make sense of the world and guide how they move through the world, a personal motto. They are belonging. They have good relationships in their lives. This is the number one predictor. A Harvard longitudinal study recently published the latest findings. And again, far and away, the best predictor of a happy life is having good people in your life. And then becoming, you have this vision of who you want to be, right? So if you have a moral code, if you have people in your corner and you have a vision for who you want to become, I think you're on your way to a good life. And I think that ikigai concept is a great way to think about finding the work that you want.
Nice. So one question that kind of comes up a lot is the generational aspects of the application of what you're talking about because I know when I started the industry before 2000, it was almost like it was a pivot point. Before that was just very, like I said, the Wall Street movie, Gordon Gekko, Bud Fox kind of stuff. And then generationally, there was a shift after that. And I feel like I'm a Gen Xer. I don't know what you are, but I'm a Gen Xer, and I feel like we're probably like the last vestige of that. And then the future generations just have a very different perspective on work and life, in a good way. But it's also I'm curious if you ever kind of look through the generational aspects and how that applies.
Yeah, I have. I'm Gen X as well. I'm on the young end of Gen X, but still very much I identify as Gen X. And I'm glad we're talking about it, Kirk, because we're routinely overlooked. But but when you look at this at what drives financial behavior across the generations, right? There's different realities, and the biggest thing that we see, two things that we'll see. First of all, some of what gets codified as generational differences disappears as people age and make more money. So in time, everyone sort of moves to the suburb and becomes more conservative. This is one thing that you see as people age. They become more conservative with money. They become more politically conservative. And, a lot of those distinctions that may have been there when they were younger start to disappear as they age. So in some ways, I think generational differences are overblown because it's easy to feel one way when you're 20. You may feel very differently when you're 60. But there are generational differences that persist. And one of the biggest ones when it comes to investing is that younger people are more purpose-driven and more values-led than the older generations. Going back to this Gordon Gekko greed is good kind of mentality, among the oldest generations, we see this attitude that I want to invest in whatever makes me the most money. Whatever makes me the most money, put me in that. I don't care if it's guns or cigarettes or, whatever. Let's have it and let's get paid. And the younger the generation gets, the more values driven they become. And it's interesting. I have two chapters in the book about money and values. And if you look at every major social and civil rights movement of the last 100 or so years, they all use economic and financial levers to bring about their good works. If you look at the end of apartheid in South Africa, that was largely brought to pass as people divested of the diamond mines and refused to play South African teams in international sporting events. All of this sort of voting with dollars shined a bright light on the malpractice that was occurring in South Africa. If you think about the civil rights movement here in our country, in my home state of Alabama, Rosa Parks was using, she may not have construed it as such at the time, but she was using a financial lever to bring about change. They hobbled the Montgomery Bus Company because African American riders made up a large percentage of their ridership. And when they began to boycott the bus company, it brought about change. And so that's the biggest difference that I see that's enduring, is that younger generations are voting with their dollars more, and they realize that the way you spend your money is a vote for the kind of world that you want to live in. And I think that's a powerful realization.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, you mentioned Gen X, the forgotten generation. I think it's in part because we don't have any politicians that represent us, and that's in part because we want nothing to do with it. We're the generation that sees through all the lies and all the BS, and we're just like, we want none of it. You walk into a store, I'm just like, no, just looking, leave me alone. You know?
Too cynical to run. Yeah, too cynical to
Yeah.
run. It's
Yep.
true.
Yeah, and it's amazing. So we've let the boomers carry on way too long.
Yeah,
Uh,
I do think you get a vote though with your dollars. That, I mean, this is kind of heretical for an American to say, but I think it may be more powerful than your vote in the ballot box, especially depending on where you live, that you can really shape the world in material ways by how to choose your money. And you don't just do it every 4 years, you do it every single day of your life.
Yeah, and it kind of brings up this other part you mentioned like earlier, the softer side of money. When you think about like I talk to a lot of people, day in day out about things like ESG,
Hmm.
or it used to be socially responsible investing, and while I appreciate the fact they want to do that and make their money do something good, it ends up obviously not affecting anything because someone's going to buy or sell, whether it's you or not, doesn't matter. I remember when I was working in Boston when I first started, I was in Post Office Square, and there were a bunch of people basically boycotting Fidelity so they wouldn't buy oil companies in their portfolios. I was like, it doesn't, not going to change anything, whether they
Hmm.
buy it or someone else. Um, but how should people be thinking about combining um, investing with, maybe more their kind of the moral side of how they're thinking about things?
Yeah, it's easy to get cynical about this as the Gen Xers that we are. And
Hmm.
so this is, the unpopular truth is that yes, you divesting of whatever in a secondary market like the stock market isn't going to do anything because the incremental buyer of, Philip Morris or Lockheed Martin or whoever is going to come in and buy your shares at a discount now that you don't want them. So there is a way to think about that. I think the more powerful way to think about it though is first of all, be sure that you're voting your shares. You do have a voice there, and in some ways, it's sort of like divesting of an investment because you don't like the way they're practicing is sort of like saying, well, I don't like who won the election, so I'm going to move to Canada. In, in in some ways, it is better for you to own a little bit of everything, right? To just own the world and to vote your shares in a way that makes those companies behave in the way that you would like. Because I think we've seen with a lot of these energy companies, which have been big targets of divestment, over time, they've adapted and molded themselves into doing more green energy projects and things like that. So I think there are ways to shape the future of even companies which may be seen as worthy of divestment if we stick along for the ride instead of moving to Canada. The other thing that I would say is I do think there is power in what gets measured gets done. If you look at something like equal representation among men and women on corporate boards, there's good research now to show that corporate boards that have equal representation among men and women, which is not often been the case historically, they tend to outperform companies that that have all men or mostly men on the board, and those diverse perspectives are valuable. And so there are sort of women's leadership funds that divest of companies that don't have equal representation on their boards. The biggest power there is, I think, not the divestment itself, which doesn't do a whole lot, as you've talked about, but it's the conversation. It's the measurement of that thing, which I think is impactful. And then the final thing I would say is from a consumer perspective, your dollars are very powerful. The stock market is a secondary market. It's kind of a copy of a copy. Your dollars are not quite as impactful. But the way that you choose to spend or not spend your dollars, 70% of the US economy is a consumer economy. The choices you make day to day about how to spend money are material. So be sure to support businesses that you care about and, steer clear of the ones that you don't want to flourish.
Yeah, it's that's great. So one thing that comes up a lot is when I think about the boomers when they're retiring. Here's a generation who worked really hard, saved a lot of money, they're very diligent, and then they get to retirement, and then they just can't shut it off, right? They
Mhm.
can't make that pivot from um, working hard and saving into no longer working and spending. And that's a big psychological shift for anybody. But I
Mhm.
think especially for them because they've been so diligent, I've seen it's like you can't just flip the light switch. It's really challenging. So how can people think about that sort of a transition in a way that brings more meaning to their life and allows them to make that pivot without psychologically getting really disrupted, which is typically what happens.
Yeah, I think there's at least two things. This is the number one thing I get asked about. It's funny. I think it's a sign of a good market. Forever, I think the biggest questions I got in the wake of the great financial crisis are, how do we get my clients not to panic? How can I calm people down? And anymore, it seems like this is the number one question that I get is how can we help uh, with with spending money down, which is a nice problem to have. But I think there's a couple things that are happening if this is the case and you're kind of locked in saver mode or locked in don't spend it mode. The first is that you have too tightly conflated your net worth with your self worth. There is a subset of the population for whom the money in their bank, the number that they see every day when they log into that account, is a material reflection of the quality of the life they lived and the kind of person that they are. That is, of course, not the case. And your money doesn't say much of anything at all about the kind of person that you are. And so I think it's time that we divorce those two numbers, that you need to look for other sources of meaning, other sources of personal value if that number has become too big a piece of the pie of how you think about what you do in the world or the value that you have. The other thing that I think we have to do is a lot of times spending is framed as profligacy or irresponsible or pleasure seeking. And I think for a lot of people, boomers and silent generation and other folks like that, I think that if we reframe it to talk about the good that they can do, talk about how you can make the most of the years you have left and leave a familial legacy, to leave a philanthropic legacy. What's the good you want to do? I've seen even in the advisory community where I work, a lot of times it's framed as, hey, treat yourself, buy a Porsche, do something fun, take a Ritz-Carlton cruise. You earned it, buddy. And for a certain subset of like hardworking, salt of the earth folks that became millionaires next door, the Porsche or the Ritz cruise is just not appealing to them. But I think when you frame it in terms of something that they value and that it allows them to say yes to something that they value deeply or to leave a personal legacy, I think that becomes a lot more compelling than the treat yourself message that we've been prone to give.
Yeah, and one thing that kind of comes up a lot, you take the other side of that, which is when you're younger. Um, when you're younger, you're trying to work hard, you're trying to save to build that future nest egg, which will allow you to do things you've always wanted to do. And part of the challenge is, the dollars you spent early on means you're less compounding later
Mm-hmm.
on, right? Um, but, so we're all taught, and Wall Street does a great job at this, is we brainwash everybody to say, save all your money so it grows and do all this. And nothing wrong with that. But then effectively you're sacrificing your today for tomorrow, right? Instead of going out and I have this new thing where I try to I try to take like the topless approach to life. So I don't need a Porsche, but I can go on Turo and I can go rent a Porsche for 3 days and just drive it
Mm-hmm.
around and have a good time, and it doesn't cost me much money.
Right.
So I've started to like do stuff like this a little bit more because when I was younger, I never spent anything. Like I spent on experiences and that was it. And I still do, but I think when you're younger, you just don't have the means. And if you do have the means, then you're not saving. So you either get into this class of people who are either spending everything they got and then they're not saving and they wait till they're 50, till their kids are in college or 55, and then they start saving everything so they can get to retirement. But how can people balance that? Because it's hard to do both, especially with
Yeah.
the inflation that we have now.
Yeah, I like the tapas approach to life. That's good. I'm going to use that. So, I
Sold.
I did research a few years ago. I interviewed 425 married couples, and I asked them what do they fight about when they fight about money, and the answers were fascinating. And the number one point of disagreement, the number one point of disagreement among married couples was whether the best use of money was to enjoy today or to secure tomorrow. And what you found is that the two poles of this continuum were well and thoroughly judgmental of people on the other side of the aisle. So people whose vision for money was to YOLO, to like to enjoy the day, they looked at people in the save for tomorrow camp as lame, stick in the mud, no fun, nerds. And then the people in the save for tomorrow camp looked at the people in the enjoy today camp as, frivolous, unserious, untrustworthy. And there were deep, deep value judgments on both sides. And a lot of times, if you drill down far enough, it comes to how we were raised. And so I don't know that there's any silver bullet here except to realize that the answer is both and not either or. That's, either of these approaches taken to extreme is very damaging, and that the approach that we should be taking is both and just sort of optimizing for the right things. I've learned about this. This is the number one lesson my dad has taught me. He's my advisor, obviously. And when we were kids, my dad, the financial advisor, was maniacal about paying off our house. Kirk, we ate beans and toast for 10 years so that man could pay off his house. I mean, we never went anywhere. We didn't eat well. Just grind, 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 pay off the house, because in my house, debt was a four-letter word, just like the rest of the four-letter words, and he hated debt. So he paid off his house at a young age, mid 30s, paid off his house. And now my dad is a very successful, he's a wealthy man. He's a very successful financial advisor. Well, but now his kids are gone, and now my mom's in poor health. And so now they have all this money and not all the time, not all the people around them that they love, and not all the ability. So life doesn't offer any guarantees for better or for worse. And so I think the answer is to realize there's no, it's not a value judgment. It's not a moral thing to be fun and free with money. It's not a moral thing to be tight and future focused with money. We need to maximize both the uncertainty of today and the uncertainty of tomorrow. And the only way to do that is to find whatever a good split for you is between enjoying the moment and planning for future moments.
Yeah, no, that's a great perspective. And it kind of brings up, I know a lot of the younger generations, the millennials, Gen Z, they grew up in the shadow of 2008.
Mm.
I started in 99, December of 99 to be specific. So, I got to see risk management for all the way down for the
Yeah.
first few years. And that was my lived experience. Like, I didn't
Mhm.
know the boom market of the 20 years prior. I mean, I did because when I was in college, I was investing some small money in stocks and having a good time, but it wasn't, it was just small money. And then you start working, and it's just 3 years, the market just went down. So you learn really quick, well, this is the most important thing. So that's colored my entire experience. So now I'm risk
Mhm.
management first because of that experience. And I think about all these people that started their careers after 2008. Um, First of all, everything's been sunshine and roses since then. The markets just go up; they never go down. But um, but people who kind of experience that early part of it realize that wow, things can get really, really bad. Um, and so I kind of think about like the younger generations. How should they be thinking about investing? Because you have that lived experience, which it's either everything's perfect all the time because it has been since 2008. You had a few speed bumps, but basically everything's great. Um, they didn't have that 13 years more or less of experience from 2000, 2013, where you made no money by indexing.
Mhm.
Um, and so they have this very carved out experience. And then on top of that, they've gotten an environment where it's really hard to afford much. You see these influencers are making a bazillion dollars by going online and influencing others, but no one can live that life because inflation's through the roof. So how should most people be thinking about this in a practical way? Because not only from what we just talked about is hard, it's even harder because it's hard to afford anything nowadays. So how should how can people pivot their thinking to maybe a more realistic way to for your three Bs and all the different aspects we talked about so far, like the PERMA model. How can people like encompass that, given the fact it's just I feel bad for the younger generation. It's just really hard. It's hard for people with a family, nonetheless. Somebody who's just starting out.
Yeah, I think that's I'll try and answer. I think that's two different questions. So the first one, with respect to your own personal history, this is one of the hardest things to shake. And Morgan Housel, I'm going to mess up his quote, but he says something to the effect of, your lived experience of the world is less than 1% of human history, but it's 99.99% of how you think things are. And this is true of markets, where there's something in psychology called primacy and recency. We are unduly swayed by things that happen early in a sequence or late in a sequence. So often our vision of what markets are like is heavily weighted towards our early experience of markets and then like what's happened in the last 18 months. And so if you think about you, right, you get in 1999 and 6 months later, the floor has fallen out and it takes 15 years for the NASDAQ to meet a new high. If you look at me, I finished my PhD in 2007, got a good job, and promptly started investing a large percentage of my money, which was then just buzzsawed by the great financial crisis. So one thing about me, and it sounds like you, is I have always been more a risk averse than I should be because of that early experience. That thing has loomed very large in my mind. I know that about myself, and it's a constant battle to try and overcome that. And I think the recipe for that is first self-awareness, and secondarily to become a market historian. I was reading up on the Great Depression yesterday, and it was like the market dropped 89%. 89%. That has happened in every developed market. Every developed market in the world has seen a 75% or greater decline somewhere in its history. And yet, if you read the average financial influencer who's been investing for the last 5 to 10 years, they would tell you that markets reliably give you 10 to 12% a year, and that you can plan your FIRE, you can plan your early retirement, banking all the way home on 10 to 12% a year with no sequence of returns risk. And it's just not the case. And so I think the recipe for overcoming that personal experience is to read enough about market history that you become a market historian and you go, look, if it's happened before, it can happen again. And, we find ourselves at this moment where the market has been on fire this year, but we also see very, very steep valuations across the US market, the widest divergence in history between US and other developed foreign markets. And we have seen this before. I'm not making any sort of a short-term prediction, but we sort of know how this goes, at least in the longer term. And I think it's smart to be wary and to be a market historian. In terms of today's inflation, it sort of is what it is, and thankfully it seems to be slowing somewhat. But there's no doubt that things are just a great deal more expensive than they were a couple of years ago. And so for young people, there's a chapter in The Soul of Wealth that talks about maximizing the engine of your wealth, which is you. The best predictor of how much money you make is still education. The first thing, one thing you can do to overcome the effects of inflation is to get all the training and all the education that you can. And I also cite research in there that people who take care of themselves make more money and they're more likely to get promoted. People who go to therapy make 10% more per year than their same education peers. People who have a mentor are more likely to get promoted and get better paid. People who exercise regularly make better money and spend less on their health insurance premiums. So I think it's easy to get caught up in the woe is me narrative because it is bad. I mean, housing is outrageous, inflation is gross, but we can cry about the way that things are, or we can try and take the power back, invest in ourselves through education and self-care. And I think that's the quickest route to greatness.
Yeah, I would agree with that. No one ever became successful by being a victim, so I totally agree. I think it's there's a lot that goes into that, and I love the aspect of investing in yourself. I think that um, we all think we know the way the world works. We all think we know, how we're really smart and we know everything, and yet we haven't, we haven't tapped into even 1% of what's out there. Um, as we kind of wrap it up here, what are some final thoughts? I know you talk a little bit about gratitude and generosity, but how should people be thinking about that when it comes to finance and maybe how does that impact your mental health? Not just your tax benefits, but how does it impact your mental health?
Yeah, one of the chapters in The Soul of Wealth that talks about gratitude shows that a simple act of writing down one thing you're thankful for every day. So, we're talking 2 to 3 minutes a day, just reflecting, counting your blessings, writing down something that you're grateful for. The increase in happiness was comparable to taking psychiatric medication. And I'm not against, to be clear, I'm not against therapy or medication or any of that. But it's powerful to see how such a simple act can have such a positive outcome. Another study that I cite there talks about sending a letter thanking someone whose contribution to your life may have been overlooked, right? So a teacher who believed in you, a coach, a Sunday school teacher, whatever, writing them a letter and saying, look, I'm not sure you know how much this meant to me or what a big deal this was. That impacted someone's happiness for over a month, positively impacted their happiness for over a month. So things like gratitude and generosity are massive contributors to our health and wealth and well-being. So I hope people won't forget about that. I hope they'll send the elevator back down when they've made it to the top.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a great way to end it. So Daniel, appreciate you coming on the show. Where can people find more about you and your new book?
Yeah, go check out The Soul of Wealth wherever fine books are sold. And yeah, I'm on Twitter at Daniel Crosby and on LinkedIn, Daniel Crosby, PhD.
Awesome. Well, once again, thanks for coming on the show. We'll definitely be back on in the future.
Thanks, Kurt.
Hey, Doug, did you hear? We're giving away free money. Well, I'll tell you about it in a minute, but before I do, there's a saying in the mining community, well, precious metals mining, that is. The saying is that if you want the best deals, you have to be in the room. Now, you're probably thinking, what does it mean to be in the room? Well, I'll tell you. Being in the room means that you're on the short list of people who get invited to be a part of the best deals. These are the deals that most investors will never have access to. You mean like IPOs? Nope, IPOs are chump change. Those are for retail investors, small potatoes. That's nothing compared to these deals. These deals would have you salivating to get access to them. Once you know they exist, you will never look at investing the same way again. I almost don't want to even tell you that they exist because it will ruin your thinking of how the investing world really works. Now, you might be excited that these deals exist, but you only have access to the deals if you're an insider, or in the room as they call it. Now, as loyal listeners to the show, I'm going to give you a chance to be in the room. Money Tree Investing Podcast has created the Insiders Club. This is a community of our show's members who are loyal listeners of the show and want to get more out of their investing experience. Being a part of the Insiders Club gives you insider status for upcoming events and webinars, discounts, free stuff and books, and influence on the future direction of the show. This is a great opportunity to join us as we expand our content and services. Oh, and did I mention free money? Yes, in the next few weeks, I'll be giving away free money to our members of the Insiders Club as my appreciation for listening to the show. Now, there's no cost to join the Insiders Club. Just go to moneytreepodcast.com/free money today to join the community. That's www.moneytreepodcast.com/free money. I hope to see you in the room. All right. Well, that was a great interview with Daniel. Always appreciate him coming to the show. Love his stuff, and we'll definitely have him back on the future. Now we're into the panel portion of the show where you have our very own Barb Freeberg. Hey, Barb.
Hey, happy to be here.
Good. Well, glad to have Barb. She's a little spicy today, so can't wait to hear what she has to say. We also have our very own Phil Weiss. Hey, Phil.
Hey, Kirk, happy to be here as well. Looking forward to a good conversation today.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, let's start with you, Barb, before we get before the spice disappears. What were some of your takeaways from the interview?
Well, I listened to it just a few minutes ago, and the thing that I cannot get out of my head is that every country experiences at some point a 70 to 75% stock market decline. Ours was in the 20s and late 20s and 30s, and that pushed me over the edge. Now, let me give you an aside. It's not that I don't know market history, and it's not that I don't know psychology. I have a master's in counseling. My husband's a psychologist. I've been reading about behavioral finance my entire life. The problem is, I can't act on it. I am so susceptible that every day I wake up knowing that the markets could fall today. So, we'll find out how you handle these realities of balancing the markets and your mental fears and anxieties, which can really hurt you over the long haul.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Barb. Phil, what about you? What are some of your takeaways?
And what Barb said is so true. It's really hard. We say we don't want to let our emotions get in the way, but they do. It's really hard to avoid it. I try to put a process in place to help reduce the impact it has, but it's hard. I mean, and you can look at things, like look at the market now. It's hard to argue, excuse me, that it's not highly valued. But if you pull back and you're wrong, then what happens? So you also have to worry about that aspect. I mean, a lot of these things too that Dan talked about, living a happy life. I mean, that's so much of a focus when I work with clients because I start with their life plan because I want to build a financial plan that helps them do the things that really matter to them. And those things that he talked about in his, the 5 elements of a happy life, the PERMA model. I mean, those are the type of things that come up all the time when people are talking about those things that really matter to them. It's the relationships, it's experiences. Yes, we all want to have experiences, but relationships and engagement and having meaning, those things all matter as well. And sometimes we focus so much on the experiences that we miss some of those other things too.
Yeah, I agree. And before we get to Barb, I want to follow up on your point in emotion about emotions and having systems and processes to keep them in check. So you're actively managing portfolios. What do you do to help people keep their emotions in check, or to keep your emotions in check as you're managing your portfolios?
So I, I have target allocations and I have rules that tell me when I'm supposed to rebalance. And so those are the primary things that govern it. Because if we don't at least have that, what do you do? Like you, I have a client that will call and say, "Hey, I'm not keeping up with the market." Well, guess what? When we have a portfolio that's allocated, you're not going to keep up with the market because the market is the S&P 500, which we've got 7 stocks that are dominating that market. And it's also large cap. It leaves out non-US. It leaves out the bond market. It leaves out small caps. It leaves out mid caps. And those things are all lagging the S&P. So if you want to have a diversified portfolio, you're not going to keep up with the S&P. It's just not possible in this environment. But if you go through history, the S&P is not always the best performing. I mean, look at any asset allocation quilt that shows how different market classes, asset classes have performed over the last 10 years, 20 years, whatever you want. It's not always the same. if you go back to the 2000s, it was different. Right now, we've been on a long run of long cap stocks outperforming, but that's not always going to be the case. I think. Look, I can't know for sure, but that's what I think. But like I said, here's our target allocation, and I use tolerance bands. So let's say you have a 60-40 allocation. If we get to 65-35 or we get to 55-45, that's our trigger for rebalancing. So that's what I'm using kind of as that process or system to help take the emotion out so that I don't let it run too much. That's definitely one way that I like to attack it.
Okay, great. What about you, Barb? What are some of the ways that you handle systems around dealing with your
I have
emotions?
another strategy, and that's called a pre-mortem. And what I do is I test my portfolio. I do what Phil says as well. I have a target allocation that I think is aligned with my risk level. We'll find out if it really is, if the market drops, more than I anticipate. But I also have enough living expenses in short-term debt and cash to last me for 5+ years so that I do not have to sell should there be a big market crash. And I'm, teetering on the retirement years, so my income is only going to go down going forward. But the pre-mortem is I test my portfolio and I plug in say, a flat bond market and a decline in stocks 35 to 40%. And then I see what the result is. And I ask myself, okay, if my portfolio overall, say, drops 25%, am I okay with that? Can I live with that? And if the answer is no, then your portfolio is too aggressive. If the answer is yes, well, then just prepare yourself psychologically because the markets now, by many standards, are overvalued by nearly 100%, according to historical assets. It's historical data. We're not at the highest valuations. Those were in 1999 in recent years, but we're getting there. So anyone out there who is in the investment markets should have an awareness that the likelihood of their stock portfolio declining is equal to or greater than the likelihood of it going up during the next several years. And that's the catch. We don't know when.
Yeah, yeah. I love the idea of a pre-mortem. I think it's a great idea, and I've heard about that in the past, and I think not enough people do that. Um, I am curious, when we think about one of the things we talked about was the generational impact on markets and on investing, right? And uh, I don't know what each person on the panel generationally. I'm Gen X, so I can't speak for Barb and Phil, but as a Gen
I'm a
Xer.
boomer, but, clearly I consider myself, not a boomer.
Good. Boomers are okay, Barb. They're okay. We all have parents, so they're okay. But it's funny as Gen Xer, a different experience. I was just reading a quick thing before the episode because I saw a funny meme on it. But basically, what it just talks about is like Gen X was the latchkey kids. We were survived on parents would kick us out in the morning. We'd survive on garden hose water all day, and maybe if we were lucky, we got lunch from someone's house. But basically, you just survived all day, and you came home for dinner before the lights came on, and it was very different from today's generations. And I think the same goes true for markets, right? It's not your how you handle experiences are dependent upon your experience, right? How you were raised, how you came up. Um, and so when I started in the markets in 99, I was in college, I was trading or messing around with some small money and, made and lost money in the 90s. And then 99 hit, I started in this industry and then pretty much right away. I started in December of 99 to be specific. So pretty much right away, the markets after the first few months of 2000 the markets pretty much went down for like 3 years. And that colored my experience in the markets in a major way because my job wasn't how do I make the most money for my clients? It's how do I preserve wealth and how do I keep them from losing it in a market where everyone was losing money and everyone was focused on tech and nothing else. And so, now we have generations of people who've never seen a bear market because they started in 2009 or after, and they don't know what it's like. So what are your thoughts on that, Barb? How should people be thinking about their own experience coloring their current market vision of what they think the markets are going
I
to do?
loved Dr. Crosby's comment about everyone should understand market history because that can give you a certain amount of comfort in letting you know in the past, and I usually say, look at, maybe the past 100 years and see how markets have performed during different time periods. Now, does that mean that's going to tell you what's going to happen tomorrow? Absolutely not. But what it is going to tell you is these are some of the potentials that you can expect. If you started investing in 2009, you have been totally in almost 100% bull market. And you may think that's what happens. And you may think if stocks fall, well, within the next 6, 12 months, they're going to go back. That is not historically correct. So psychologically, you need to understand that markets go down and they can stay down for a while. And how can you handle that? How can you set your portfolio up for long-term success? And one of the things that I always tell people is if you have a goal for your money, say you want to buy a new house, you want to take a big vacation, do a big remodel within the next 2 to 5 years, those dollars should not be in the stock market. Because during the next 2 to 5 years, if the market goes down, and it might, 20, 30%, then all of a sudden your $100,000 deposit for your new house is now worth $70,000. So, 2 points: have money in safer cash assets that you will need within the next few years. And then understand worst case scenarios. You don't need to worry about the best case scenarios because they cause no pain. But be prepared for potential worst case scenarios and have a diversified portfolio. I am a big fan of not only US stocks, but all sorts of asset classes that may not have done so well, from international to small cap to value to bonds, so that no, you're never going to get the highest returns, but also when the markets fall, you're never going to suffer the greatest losses.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate that, Barb. Phil, what about you? What are your opinions on this?
Well, when Dan was talking about this, he mentioned Morgan Housel. And I heard Morgan speak about this too. Our views of the market, we can read all the history we want, but experiences, what we've experienced matters more. So if you grew up in the 70s when we had a terrible market and we had high inflation, you have a very different view than if you grew up in the 80s or the 90s or the 2000s, whenever it is. Your view is tainted by what you experienced. And that does make a difference. And if you haven't experienced a market downturn, you don't know how you're going to react. You don't know how to react. I fully agree with something Barb said about having that cash. I mean, that's something that I do too, is I don't go 5 years, but I do go 2 to 3 years of cash that you need to have to protect yourself in a market downturn so we don't have to sell into the downturn. Because if you sell that asset and you take a loss, you can't recover it. But I have the cash there, it allows for that money, for that to recover. And when you have those near-term needs, like I was talking to a client yesterday, and she's planning to put her house on the market in February. And then she's planning to buy another home, let's say 6 to 18 months after that. What's she going to do with the cash? We're going to put it in treasuries or the money market or something like that. Why? Because sure, the market could go up and she could have more, but what if it goes down? It's better to have that money in something safe so that that money that she needs for the down payment, it doesn't go, or to even purchase, depending upon the cost of the new home. She has it and she doesn't have to worry about it. That's really important. You want to think about that a lot. When we invest and we talk about trying to beat the market, like, that involves taking on risk. Like as a financial advisor, the last thing I want to do is call you and tell you that that big thing that you wanted to do, that we had always in your plans and you were always able to do it, now you can't do it because the market fell. It's better to invest in a safe way that allows you to live your desired life than it is to take risks that put living that lifestyle that you want at risk. So it's better to not worry about chasing returns because, as Barb said, we're not going to get outperform when the market goes crazy, but we also shouldn't go down as much as the market when the market goes down, and protecting yourself against losses and allowing you to live your desired life. I think that's more important.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's it's a good way to think about it. Let me ask this. So Barb, what are some mental models? I mean, we talked, Daniel and I talked a lot about the quality of life, right? And not just making more money, but having meaning, quality of life and meaning. Um, what are some mental models you can tie into that people can be thinking about? Because it's really hard when you're focused on your money. You want more money, you want to grow it, you want to meet your goals, and yet we frequently miss the importance of, having meaning in that process. So what are some things people can be thinking about?
Well, I have a chart, a graph on my desk, and it's a Venn diagram, and it's got two circles. One is my net worth, and the other is my self-worth. And so many times I think my self-worth is equivalent to my net worth. So in order to eradicate that thinking, I drew a Venn diagram, and there is a very small overlap, just a sliver. So there are two circles and they're kind of overlapping a little, showing my net worth is not equal to my self-worth. And so what I do, because I am the worst, I know all the pitfalls. I know that I'm not defined by my net worth, by my how much my tax return says I earn every year. I know all that stuff. But I still have a hard time because I have been brought up with these beliefs and these ideas that you work hard your entire life, you become successful, and that is what makes you valuable. So that wasn't your question, was it? Your question is, how do you get away from these beliefs? And something that I do that helps is I write down the things in my life that I want to become my values and my models, just like my chart, which shows my net worth doesn't equal my self-worth. I also write down the components that make me a valuable person so I can remind myself. But the problem, I'm a mom, I'm a wife. Those are the two most important things in my life. I'm a community member. I give back to society. Those things give me value. I'm charitable, all that other stuff. And that makes me valuable. Plus, I have a belief due to my religious background that every human being is valuable upon birth. You don't have to do anything to become of value. Do I believe this? Yeah, I believe it. But do other intrusive thoughts get in every day? Yes. So what I do is I write about these incorrect beliefs that hinder me and hinder my thinking. And you can't just do it one time. You have to do it over and over to kind of retrain your mind. And it also goes to the fact that when many people get older and they've been living a frugal lifestyle their whole life, they can't change. Well, that's a point when you have to say, I've got more money than I need. That's, a lucky problem that some people have. It's okay to spend.
That's, as we call it, a I have leaves in my pool problem kind of Barb.
Yes, right. And I hate to talk about this because we're talking to the top, teeny weeny percent. And so many people are not in that situation and they're just struggling to contend with inflation and struggling to build up retirement savings so that when they do get to a ripe old age like I am, that they can retire. So don't think that I am unsympathetic or forgetting about those very realities either.
I want to see you go out and buy that Porsche, Barb. Although fortunately today you don't have to go buy the Porsche because as I found out last year when we went down to a hockey tournament in Nashville, you can go on Turo and you can rent almost any car and it's not that expensive. You're just borrowing it. It's like a ride share kind of thing. I got to
So, did you do it,
Oh,
Kirk?
well, so here's what happened. So last year, we rented a Camaro. So my oldest son, he has a car thing. So he's got a poster on his wall of Lambos, which is funny because when I was a kid, I had one poster of a Porsche. I think it was a 911 Turbo or it was a I forget. It was maybe it wasn't. It was 940. I forget what it was back then, but it was a really cool car. And then I also had one of a Lambo. It was a Lamborghini Countach because that was the cool car of the time. It was back way back before we have these new era. Anyway, so we went down last year. We got a Camaro because it was like, well, this will be fun. I didn't tell him about it. We got it. He's like, is that our car? He could all. And he's like, and I was like, yeah, this is the one you want. He's like, no, no, no. I really like the Dodge Charger or Challenger. And I was like, oh, okay. Um, so this year we went again, and I got they didn't have the Challenger because it was already rented out, but they had a Charger with like all like the souped up stuff, the Scat Pack, and I don't know much about it. But anyway, people probably know about this. That was a fun car to drive. I actually want one because it is fast and it's comfortable. Right, the Camaro wasn't comfortable. It was like a raw beast that you're like putting you're putting a harness on and you're riding. Like it was just like it growled. It was loud. It was fun, but after a day, I'm like I'm done. But the Charger was a lot of fun, and anyway, so I was going to surprise him and get like a Porsche or Corvette or something fun. And I was just about to click the button and I look, I'm like, wait a minute. I don't think his hockey bag is going to fit in the trunk. The trunk is like, it fits like a suitcase you can put on the overhead in an airline. It's that small. And I was like, there's no, I was like, well, maybe he can hold a hockey bag in his lap. And I was like, oh, this is going to be dumb. It was a great idea. It was not that expensive. Porsches, Mercedes, BMWs, Jaguars. I don't know who drives those anymore, but all like the cool cars you'd want to drive, and they were not that expensive. And you know what? You could get a Tesla for like $30 a day because there's like 50 Teslas on there. And so it was like really cheap. And I'm thinking of doing one because I've never driven one before. But anyway, so you could do this in your city, not all cities, but a lot of cities. It is so much fun. Like, why am I going to go out and buy a nice car when I just go rent one and just get my jollies for a weekend and then I'm good for a year? It saved me a ton of money. Anyway, my 2 cents. So go ahead, Barb, go out and do it. Live your dream.
Well, and another reason I really like that idea is because we habituate. And what that means is whatever we get, however cool we think it is at the time, most of us, unless we make a concerted effort every day to be, oh, I'm so grateful for this, I'm so grateful for that, is we get used to the fancy car. We get used to the big house. We get used to all the stuff that we thought we wanted, and it stops delivering the value and enjoyment in our lives. And that's where things are really, wanting things kind of only lead to wanting more things.
Morgan Housel also tells a story kind of like what you were talking about, Kirk, where he wanted the fancy car and he goes and he rents a Porsche for a day. He's like rents it for a week, let's say. And after the first day, he says, yeah, I don't need that car anymore. That little moment was enough to make him, yeah, I got the thrill of doing it, but it's not something that I need every day. So that's also something that you can get by doing something like you said, as you go, you have this thing you really want, you go try it out, and you say, yeah, well, okay, now I did it, I'm good.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, right? Is that I mean, I've looked at renting like these luxury cars and they're super expensive. But yeah, like you said, when you think about it, like I don't need this every day. Like I know somebody who's got a Porsche, they drive it like I don't know, once a month. And then we're in Boston. So there's 6 months you're not driving it, maybe 7 or 8. You're only driving it for a short period. You got this car every year. He puts the car, he puts it into storage in his garage, but because he's 6 months without use. So he does all this stuff and he loves it, and that's great. I don't love that stuff. I just want to drive the damn thing. So what I'm gonna do, like every once in a while I do this. Like I'm just gonna go rent a car and like a nice car, and some weekend we're driving somewhere and put the family in it. We'll just have a fun time, in a nice car. And so there's so many ways. I mean, fortunately, we live in a society where you can do that now. Like growing up, it's like, pff, what are you, rich? Driving a Porsche? Like now, it's like, yeah, it's somebody else's Porsche. I'm just borrowing it for the weekend. So it's such a cool thing with technology that we've been able to do, so we can find better solutions which don't involve us making big purchases for cool things. I'm a I'm thrifty, so I'm a thrifty Scot. I'm not cheap. I'm thrifty. My wife's Dutch. She's cheap. So we have this. We both of us are thrifty, and so what's interesting is because I was raised to be. My dad was just very thrifty, and so he's just raised me not to spend money, which is a good and a bad thing. But I won't get into that. But I never want to spend money myself. Like I spend on experiences, not on stuff, because I don't want stuff. It doesn't give me joy. Um, so my youngest, he loves gifts. Like that's what gives him joy. He loves getting gifts and stuff and like that sort of thing. But when I look at what I want, like I don't want stuff, but I enjoy the experience. For me, I will spend a few $100 to go drive a Corvette around for a weekend because it's a good experience, it's fun, and then I'm good. Like I don't need to live in a Porsche every single day or Corvette or whatever. Like I'm functional. Give me a functional car that's not going to break, and I'll drive it until it does. That's all I need, right? But everyone's got their thing, right? But there's so many ways. So this has become a thing I started when I started doing Turo last year. Is I'm going to start trying to find more opportunities to do fun things in a cheap way, like the Turo thing, like rent a really cool car for a day. I'm finding more ways to do that so that I can still bring this happiness into my life without restricting myself because I just don't need it. But I'm like, I'm gonna start doing some fun stuff here and there and just like space it out, and that'll be my experiential stuff. So it's really cool that we can do that. Anyway, it's just an idea for people to apply and just come up with different ways. It's like a house share, like a Airbnb, go live somewhere cool for like a day or two and just have fun, right? You don't have to own it. But it's a good experience. So anyway, we're gonna wrap it up here. So final thoughts, Barb.
Do your best to understand what's driving your behavior. It is not easy. If you can write down your goals, your aspirations, the things that you want to do, the things that you value, and what you don't value, and what you want to take out of your life, both personally and financially, that may help you align who you are with who you really want to be. My name is Barbara Friedberg. You can find me on YouTube and at Barbara Friedberg Personal Finance.
Awesome. Thanks, Barb. And Phil, final thoughts from you.
So I'm just going to share a client story because I think it ties so well into this. So early in my life planning path, I was life plan myself, and I shared my life plan on my website. And after I did it, one of my clients, who was one of the first people that I worked on her life plan with her, she emailed me and said, Phil, thank you so much. After reading this, I finally realized I've been sitting here trying to build the biggest pile of money, but I never thought about what it was for or how much I needed. And once she sat back and started to think about that, it made a difference. She's changed her life in so many positive ways. When I look at her, she's not the same person. She doesn't look the same. She doesn't sound the same. She's so much happier. And so I kind of think about it when I sum this all up. We have a team of resources. And by team, I mean we have time, our energy, our attention, and our money. Those are all like, because you can exchange money for any one of those things. If we can align those with our values and what's important to us, that's how we can live our happiest life or our most fulfilling life. As for me, I'm Phil Weiss. My firm is Apprise Wealth Management. I know experiencing big life transitions can be stressful. My job is to help empower women facing new beginnings with the financial knowledge and tools they need to make self-assured decisions. My firm's Apprise Wealth Management. We'd love to get to know you. If you're facing a new beginning, you can take our Flourish Through Life's Big Changes assessment at apprisewealth.com/assessment to discover how ready you are to embrace and thrive through your significant life transition. You can also sign up for our blog. Thanks for having me today, Kirk.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Phil. That's the show for this week. Thank you again for joining us on Money Tree Investing Podcast. My name's Kirk Chisholm, Wealth Manager of Innovative Advisor Group. We don't just manage your wealth, we make your life better. You can find more about me at innovativewealth.com. And of course, you can find me every week here on this show. You can also check out our show at Money Tree Investing Podcast. On our website, you'll have access to the show notes, resources, and the archive shows. Please remember to subscribe on our YouTube channel for immediate access to the new shows when they're released. When you subscribe to the show, it allows us to get access to some of the top minds of investing in personal finance. While you're here, please leave a comment and question if you want us to address it on the show. Have a great week ahead, and remember, no one will care about your money like you do, so invest in your life.